Hey everyone, it's your boy Kaizen from Golden Circle Games, and I've got a tasty little deck tech for you today. We've got Ognis the Dragon's Lash. He's a hasty treasure maker, and I thought this one would be really a fun one to make, and it turns out it was. So Ognis the Dragon's Lash is one generic, one hybrid Rakdos, red, and one hybrid Gruul for a legendary creature, Vishino Warrior. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. He has haste and says whenever a creature you control with haste attacks, create a tapped treasure token. So the aim of this deck is to get as many hasty creatures out as you can to take advantage of creating those treasure tokens. And with those treasures we want to create value, so whether that be the mana value in them or whether we can do something else with them as well. Our win cons are passive damage from the treasures that we've got. We have a lot of creatures in there or enchantments that deal passive damage when you sacrifice a permanent or a permanent leaves the battlefield, things like that. Or we can create enough creatures on the battlefield and deal combat damage to a player and take them out that way as well. The cost of this deck is $410 or €250. To kick things off, we've got the Daddia ramp, we've got the Soul Ring. It's only one generic to cast and you can tap it to add 2 colourless mana. We've also got the Arcane Signet. It's 2 generic mana to cast and you can tap it and add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. And then a classic ramp spell with Cultivate, 2 generic, 1 green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put one of them onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, then shuffle. Then we've got Farseek for 1 generic and 1 green. Search your library for a plains, island, swamp or mountain card and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. So good for mana fixing there. Then we've got Harrow for 2 generic and 1 green. Sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic land cards and put them into play. Shuffle your library afterwards. And Rampant Growth for 1 generic, 1 green. Search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tap, and then shuffle. And then we've got an all-star card in this deck. It does everything that the deck wants to do. It's a Chroma's Memorial for 7 generic mana. It says creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from red and black. So it's got the haste in there, so it's going to give all our creatures haste. They're going to have vigilance, so we can actually use them in defense as well if we need to. It's going to give them evasion with the flying as well. First strike gives them protection, and if someone's playing black and red, we're going to get combat damage through as well. So really good card in the deck. And now we've got Arnie a Broken Brow for 2 generic and 1 red. He has haste himself and also has Boast, and Boast can only be activated if the creature is attacked this turn and only once each turn. But it says for 1 generic mana you may change Arnie Broken Brow's base power to 1 plus the greatest amount power among other creatures you control until end of turn. So we have got some other bigger creatures in here, so we can just increase the damage we do with Arnie for only 1 mana, so it's a good return on that. And we've got Beastcaller Savant for 1 generic and 1 green. He has haste himself, so we can use the tap ability straight away. And it says add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell. We have a lot of creatures in here, so he's really good ramp for that. And also he has haste himself, so we can use him in conjunction with our commander to create tap treasures if we want to. We've got Bloodbraid Elf for 2 generic, 1 red, 1 green. Has haste, but also Cascade. So when you cast this spell, exile cards from the top of your library into exile a non-land card that costs less. You may cast a card without paying its mana cost. Put the exile cards on the bottom in a random order. So Haste Synergy with our commander, plus we could get something decent off the top for free. We've got a lot of stuff that's 3 mana or less, so a really good value card in the deck. We also have a Brushfire Elemental for 1 red and 1 green. Has haste, it says Brushfire Elemental can't be blocked by creatures with 2 power less. Also has a landfall trigger. It says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, Brushfire Elemental gets +2/+2 until end of turn. And we do have a lot of sack lands in here, so you can get pretty big pretty quickly. Also, Captain Lannery Storm for 2 generic and 1 red has haste. Whenever Captain Lannery Storm attacks, create a colourless treasure artifact token. With tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. And it says, whenever you sacrifice a treasure, Captain Lannery Storm gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So again, attacking, you're going to get an untapped treasure and also a tapped treasure, so that's really good. And you can sacrifice a load of treasures to Captain Lannery Storm. And again, they're going to get really big if they can do the combat damage there. We've got a Crashing Drawbridge for 2 generic mana. It has Defender and says tap, creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. So any creatures we have that don't necessarily have haste, we can use this as a haste enabler. And we've got Goldspan Dragon for 3 generic and 2 red mana. Flying haste, whenever Goldspan Dragon attacks or becomes the target of a spell, create a treasure token. So again, doubling up on our treasures there when we attack. And treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any colour. So we'll be doubling the treasures when we get to untap them on our next turn from our commander. We're actually doubling the mana we get from those treasures. And we got Goro Goro, Disciple of Ryusei. And for 1 red mana, you can have creatures you control gain haste until end of turn. So again, a good cheap haste enabler. But also has for 3 generic and 2 red, create a 5/5 red dragon spirit creature token with flying. Activate only if you control an attacking modified creature. So we're going to be attacking anyway. We do have some equipment in here that we can attach to our creatures. So very likely that we will have a modified creature. And then we can spend any treasures we've got to create some 5/5 dragon spirits with evasion, so can do a lot of damage with them. And we've got Grand Warlord Rada for 2 generic, 1 red, 1 green. Has haste, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control attack, add that much mana in any combination of red and or green. Until end of turn, you don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So we're not going to only gain the tapped treasure from our commander, but we're going to gain mana from our attacking creatures, which is what this deck wants to do anyway. So then we can use that mana to cast other things after our attack phase. We've got Hammer of Perforos for 1 generic and 2 red. It's another haste enabler, so it says creatures you control have haste. And for 2 generic and 1 red, you can tap it, sacrifice a land, put a 3/3 colourless Golem Enchantment artifact creature token onto the battlefield. Not something we're probably going to do very often, but it's a good way to make tokens if we need to. And we've got Jaxis the Troublemaker for 3 generic and 1 red. And for 1 red mana, you can tap it, discard a card, create a token that's a copy of another target creature you control. It gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card, sacrifice it at the beginning of your next end step, activate only as a sorcery. So if we have one of our really high value creatures out, we can just discard a card and for 1 red mana, create a token copy of it that's also going to draw a card at the end of turn. So really, really good value there. And you can blitz it out for 1 generic and 1 red. It says if you cast a spell for its blitz cost, it gains haste, and when this creature dies, draw a card, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So if we're low on mana, we can use this, create a treasure token a tap treasure token if our commander's out, but we can also still use ability because it gains haste from the blitz cost. So just a really versatile card. And we've got Layla the Blade Reforged for 2 generic and 1 red. Has haste and says whenever Layla the Blade Reforged attacks, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into exile from your library and or your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Layla. So it's going to get the counter straight away. It's a bit of impulsive card draw, and it's a haste. It has haste, so it's going to synergize well with our commander. So a lot there on one card. We've got a Legion Loyalist for only 1 red mana. Has haste and has Battalion. So whenever Legion Loyalist and at least 2 other creatures attack, which is more than likely because there's a lot of creature cards in here, creatures you control gain first strike and trample until end of turn and can't be blocked by creature tokens this turn. So it just gives our attacking creatures a lot of value, and then people will maybe think twice about blocking them, so we can get the combat damage through to them. We've also got Lightning Greaves for 2 generic mana. And it says a quick creature has haste and shroud, so it can't be the target of spells or abilities, and it has an equip cost of 0. So this is just a really cheap way to enable haste on creatures that maybe don't have it and give it a bit of protection to them as well. And we haven't only got the hammer, we got the man himself, Perforos Bronze Blooded for 4 generic and 1 red. Has indestructible, and as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforos isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have haste, so again, another haste enabler. And for 2 generic and 1 red, you may put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from your hand onto the battlefield, sacrifice at the beginning of your next end step. So if you've got some expensive creatures in a hand that we want to get out earlier, we can do with this ability, and we can pay into it as many times as we want and just get a lot of creatures onto the battlefield at one time. We've got Rabbit Battery for 1 red mana, has haste, and it says a quick creature gets +1/+1 and has haste. And we can reconfigure it for 1 red, so attached to target creature you control or unattached from a creature, reconfigure it only as a sorcery. While attached, this isn't a creature. So it's a double whammy really, so we can do it for 1 red mana as a creature, attack, get that tap treasure token. But if we want to, for only 1 red mana, we can reconfigure it onto another creature who may not have haste and get the advantage of the +1/+1 and giving that creature haste. So it's really a good synergistic card here. We got Rhythm of the Wild for 1 generic, 1 red, 1 green. An enchantment, it says creature spells you control can't be countered. So that's really good because we have a lot of creature spells in our deck. And non-token creatures you control have Riot, so they enter the battlefield with your choice of a +1/+1 counter or haste. So if we already have one of our haste enablers out, the least it's going to do is pump up our creatures, so a really good card here as well. We've got Swiftfoot Boots for 2 generic mana, and it says a quick creature has hexproof and haste, so it can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. And it has an equip cost of 1, so again we can protect one of our creatures or give it haste if we need to. And a Tuk-Tuk Rubble Fort for 2 generic and 1 red, has Defender and Reach, and creatures you control have haste, so again another good cheap haste enabler. We've got an Academy Manufactor for 3 generic mana. It says if you create a clue, food or treasure token, instead create 1 of each. So it's just going to provide a lot of value because we're going to be making a lot of treasure tokens. So clues gives us card draw, food gives us life. So just a lot of value in one card there. Got Agent of the Iron Throne for 2 generic and 1 black. It says commander creatures you own have whenever an artifact or creature you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So we're going to be creating all these treasure tokens and then sacking them for mana or for other reasons, and we're going to be doing 1 damage to all our opponents, so really good for the passive damage. We've got an Ancient Copper Dragon for 4 generic and 2 red. Has flying. It says whenever an Ancient Copper Dragon deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. So it could be making a lot of treasures off this guy, and if we can get a haste enabler out as well when we put him onto the battlefield, he can attack straight away. So it could be a big swing with this card. We've got Chatterfang Squirrel General for 2 generic and 1 green. Has Forest Walk, and it says if 1 or more tokens will be created under your control, those tokens plus that many 1/1 green squirrel creature tokens are created instead. So we're going to be creating our tap treasures, but we're also going to be creating 1/1 green squirrels. And the more creatures we have, and as long as we've got a haste enabler out, we're going to be creating even more tap treasures. So a really good synergistic card in the deck. And you can also, for 1 black mana, sacrifice X squirrels. Target creature gets +X, -X until end of turn. So it's an ability you may use, but we really want it to make the extra squirrel tokens from our treasures. We've got Fathom Fleet Swordjack for 3 generic and 1 red. It says whenever Fathom Fleet Swordjack attacks, it deals damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking equal to the number of artifacts you control. So if we've got a lot of those treasures out, they all count as an artifact, so it could be doing a lot of damage to a particular player. Also has Encore for 5 generic and 1 red, And we can exile this card from our graveyard. For each opponent, create a token copy that attacks that opponent this turn if able. They gain haste, sacrifice them at the beginning of the next end step, activate only as a sorcery. So later on in the game, if it's still in our graveyard and we have lots and lots of treasures out, this is a good way to finish off the game. We've got a Frontier Warmonger for 3 generic and 1 red. It says whenever one or more creatures attack one of your opponents or a planeswalker they control, those creatures gain menace until end of turn. So a good way to protect our creatures, because opponents are going to have to double block if they want to block our creatures. So it's a good way of just getting combat damage through. And we've got a Hellkite Tyrant for 4 generic and 2 red. Really fun card to put in the deck. Has flying and trample. And whenever a Hellkite Tyrant deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. And says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. So if this comes down, then your opponents have 1 turn cycle, basically, if you've got at least 20 treasures, to kill the Hellkite Tyrant, otherwise it's a game winner. So it's a really good win con to have in the deck. You got Jury, Master of the Review for 1 black and 1 red, and says whenever you sacrifice a permanent, puts a +1/+1 counter on Jury, Master of the Review. So that means any treasure that we sacrifice, Jury is getting a +1/+1 counter. And when Jury dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So it's a really good way of building up those counters on Jury. And then when it dies, we can do damage direct to a player if we need to. And we've got Kalain Reclusive Painter. It says when Kalain Reclusive Painter enters the battlefield, create a treasure token. Other creatures you control enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter on them for each mana from a treasure token spent to cast them. So it's a good way to pump up our creatures by spending the treasure tokens that we have. So just a synergistic way to use the treasures. We've got Magda Brazen Outlaw for 1 generic and 1 red. It says other dwarves you control get +1/+0, not an ability we're concerned with. It says whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token. So that includes Magda, so when she attacks, she will create a treasure. But the ability we want is sacrifice 5 treasures, search your library for an artifact or dragon card, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So we do have some really good dragons in the deck, or artifacts that we need, and we can sacrifice these tapped treasures straight away to this ability, because it just states that it needs treasures, not ones that are untapped. So a really, really good card to have in the deck. We've got a Marionette Master for 4 generic and 2 black. Fabricate 3, so when this creature enters the battlefield, put 3 +1/+1 counters on it, or create 3 1/1 colourless servo artifact creature tokens. We're more than likely going to be putting the +1/+1 counters on it, because it says whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to a Marionette Master's power. So if we put the +1/+1 counters on, each time we sack a treasure, Marionette Master is going to be doing to 4 damage to a target opponent. So really, really good card, and the damage can stack up significantly if you have a lot of treasures on the battlefield. We've got Mayhem Devil for 1 generic, 1 black, 1 red. Whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, Mayhem Devil deals 1 damage to any target. So again, we can sack the treasures to take out a problem creature if we need to, but again, we can just go straight to face with these and deal damage directly to the player. Got Nadir's Nightblade for 2 generic and 1 black. Whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So tokens, that includes the treasures that we're making, so doing that passive damage with this card is really, really good. Got Old Gnawbone for 5 generic and 2 green. Has flying, and whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. So if we can get a lot of our creatures through doing combat damage, we're going to be making a lot of tokens with Old Gnawbone out. And we've got Professional Facebreaker, probably the best named card I can think of in Magic, for 2 generic and 1 red. Has Menace, and whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token. So again, if we get that combat damage through, even more treasures. And it says sacrifice a treasure, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. So a good amount of impulsive draw there using the treasures that we're gaining from attacking creatures. We've got a Reckless Fireweaver for 1 generic and 1 red. It says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. So not only when we sacrifice creatures we're going to be doing damage, it's when we actually create the treasures as well. So just doubling up on the damage that we could possibly do. We've got Stimulus Package for 2 generic, 1 red, 1 green. It says when Stimulus Package enters the battlefield, create 2 treasure tokens. And it says sacrifice a treasure, create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. So we can convert all those treasures into more creatures, and if we have a haste enabler out, we can then attack with those creatures and create even more treasures. So just a really good way to use our treasure straight away if we need to. And we've got Treasure Map. Can't be creating treasures without a treasure map. So it's 2 generic mana. It says for 1 generic mana, you can tap it, scry 1, put a landmark counter on Treasure Map. Then if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, remove those counters, transform Treasure Map, and create 3 colourless treasure artifact tokens with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool. It transforms into Treasure Cove, which is a land, and you can tap it to add a colourless mana to your mana pool, or you can tap it and sacrifice a treasure to draw a card. So it's creating treasures, we can scry with it, and then once it flips, we can just tap it and sacrifice a treasure and turn all our treasures into card draw. So a really, really good card here. And we couldn't have a treasure deck without Zorn for 2 generic and 1 red. If you create 1 or more treasure tokens, instead create those tokens plus an additional treasure token. So it's just adding an additional treasure token for free. And this one will even come in untapped as well, so we can use it straight away, even though the ones from our commander come in tapped. And we've got some removal in the deck with Assassin's Trophy for 1 black and 1 green. Destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search the library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. We got Beast Within for 2 generic and 1 green. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. And we've also got Binding the Old Gods for 2 generic, 1 black, 1 green. So a really, really good synergistic card in the deck because we want all 3 of these modes that it has on it. So the first one, it says destroy target non-land permanent opponent controls, so a bit of removal. The second mode, search your library for a forest card, put it onto the battlefield taps, then shuffle your library, so a bit of ramp. And in the third mode, creatures you control gain Death Touch until end of turn, so people are less likely to want to block your creatures, so you should be able to get a decent amount of combat damage through. We've also got Feed the Swarm for 1 generic and 1 black. It says destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls. You lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. So good for dealing creatures, but also a bit of flexibility there for dealing with enchantments. Also Kenrith Transformation for 1 generic and 1 green. You can enchant a creature. When Kenrith Transformation enters the battlefield, draw a card. So we're drawing a card for 2 mana, it's not bad. An enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a green elk creature with base power and toughness 3/3. So if there's a problem commander that has an activated ability, then you can just shut it down with this card, and then they've got to try and then either sacrifice their commander or get rid of the enchantment to bring them back. And we've also got Putrefy for 1 generic, 1 black, 1 green. And says destroy a target artifact or creature, it can't be regenerated. And we've got Barlaged Recovery for 2 generic and 1 green. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand, so a bit of recursion. And we can also use it as Barlaged Sanctuary for a tapped land to add 1 green if we need to, if it's early game and we really don't want to miss our land drops. And we've got Chainer Nightmare Adept for 2 generic, 1 black, 1 red. It says discard a card. You may cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn. Activate only once each turn. And says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste until your next turn. So we can, just for discarding a card, cast a creature spell from a graveyard, and it gains haste as well. So synergistic with our commander. And we've got Evolution Charm for 1 generic and 1 green. Bit of a multi-purpose card, this one. And it says search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, Put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So we can choose that mode and get a bit of ramp. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Choose that one and get a bit of recursion from our graveyard. Or target creature gains flying into end of turn. So again, a good bit of evasion if we have a creature that can deal a lot of damage to a player. And then we've got Feldon of the Third Path for 1 generic and 2 red. And it says for 2 generic and 1 red, you can tap it, create a token that's a copy of a target creature in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So we can just recur a creature from a graveyard each turn by using Feldon. It gains haste, so again synergistic with our commander, and then sacrificing it at the beginning of the next end step. So some of our cards will even do damage when we sacrifice it. So yeah, really good card there. And we've got Garner the Blood Flame for 3 generic, 1 black, 1 red. Has flash, and it says whenever Garner the Blood Flame enters the battlefield, return to your hand all creature cards in your graveyard that were put there from anywhere this turn. Other creatures you control have haste. So it's a haste enabler, but also if someone board wipes, we have a lot of creatures out on the battlefield, we can just flash this in, return all those creatures back to a hand, and a lot of them are cheap enough we can then rebuild again next turn. We've also got some card draw in Beast Whisperer for 2 generic and 2 green. It says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. We've got plenty of creature spells in this deck, I think 39 so plenty of opportunity to draw cards. We've got Big Score for 3 generic and 1 red. As an additional caster costs this spell, discard a card, but you get to draw 2 cards and create 2 treasure tokens. So again, creating treasures for our synergies and drawing cards as well. So 2 for 1 in this card. And we've got Costly Plunder for 1 generic and 1 black. And it says as an additional cost to cast Costly Plunder, sacrifice an artifact or creature. So we've got plenty of those, so not a problem there. And we get to draw 2 cards. We've got Deadly Dispute for 1 generic and 1 black, and it says as an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice an artifact or creature, and we get to draw 2 cards and create a treasure token. So if we sacrifice one of our tapped treasures, we're essentially just replacing it with an untapped treasure. So a really good synergistic card with the treasures we've got. We've also got Toski, Bearer of Secrets for 3 generic and 1 green. This spell can't be countered, it has Indestructible, and it says Toski, Bearer of Secrets attacks each combat if able, but that's something we're going to be wanting to do with our creatures anyway. And it says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So if we're going to get that combat damage through, we're going to be drawing a lot of cards if we can get all that combat damage through to each player. And we've got Unexpected Windfall for 2 generic and 2 red. It says as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, but we're going to get 2 cards out of it and create 2 treasure tokens. So again, really synergistic with our deck. And we've got Zeotora's Envoy for 1 generic, 1 black, 1 red, 1 green. Has Trample and says whenever Zeotora's Envoy deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of your library. You may pay a land from the top of your library or cast a spell with mana value less than or equal to the damage dealt from the top of your library without paying its mana cost. If you don't, put that card into your hand. Also has a blitz cost of 2 generic, 1 black, 1 red, and 1 green. So just a fun card to put in the deck. We have a lot of cheap cards in the deck, so more than likely we will be getting value from the card. And we've got Dolmen's Gate for 2 generic mana, and it says prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to attacking creatures you control. So that means we can swing out. We know that none of our creatures are going to die through combat damage, so just really protection for our creatures and just enables us to keep on creating those tapped treasure tokens. We've got Overwhelming Stampede for 3 generic and 2 green. It's a nice finisher if we've got a lot of creatures out on the battlefield. It says until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample and get +X/+X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. And we've got Sareth with the Viper's Fang for 2 generic and 2 green. It says other tap creatures you control have Death Touch, so again allows us to potentially get that combat damage through. And it says other untapped creatures you control have Hexproof, so again means that our creatures will have protection when they're not attacking. And for 1 generic mana, you can tap it to untap another target creature or land you control. So if there's one we want untapped to keep it on defense for whatever reason, or if someone targets that card, we can use 1 generic mana and tap Sareth to then give it hexproof to protect it from a target spell. And we've also got a Seaboard Muse for 3 generic and 2 green, just a really good value card really. And it says untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. So that means we can untap all the treasures that we create on our turn. When it gets to the next person's turn, all those treasures untap, and then we can use them straight away. And then moving on to the lands, nothing too special here. We've got a Bloodfell Caves, which enters tapped. And it says when it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life, so you can tap it for either a black or a red mana. We've got Castle Embreth, and it enters tapped unless you control a mountain. You can tap it to add 1 red, but you can also pay 1 generic and 2 red, tap it, and creatures you control get +1/+0 till end of turn. So we have a lot of creatures out that can add up to a lot of damage. And a good commander staple should be in any deck that's more than 1 colour. Command Tower, you can tap it and add 1 mana of any colour in your commander's colour identity. You've got Darkball Pathway to tap it to add 1 black, or you can play it on the other side, the Slitherball Pathway, tap it and add 1 green. You've got Evolving Wilds, tap it, sacrifice Evolving Wilds, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. We've got Highland Forest. It's a snow land, it gives us the mountain and forest land types and enters tapped, but you can tap it for either red or green mana. We've got a Llanowar Wastes, tap it to add a generic mana, or you can tap it to add a black or green mana, and Llanowar Waste will deal 1 damage to you for that. Got Racer's Ring, enters tapped, but you can tap it for a red or a green mana, or you can pay 2 a red and a green and tap it and sacrifice Racer's Ring to draw a card. So good for a bit of card draw if needed. And also got Riveteer's Outlook, and when Riveteer's Outlook enters the battlefield, sacrifice it. When you do, search your library for a basic swamp, mountain or forest card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle and you gain 1 life. Got Smouldering Marsh, again has the swamp and mountain land types. You can tap it to add a black or a red. It says Smouldering Marsh enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. Got Tramway Station, enters the battlefield tapped. You can add a black or a red, or pay 2, a black and a red to tap it, sacrifice Tramway Station, draw a card. Or you got a Verdant Catacombs, tap it, pay 1 life, sacrifice Verdant Catacombs, search your library for a swamp or forest card and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Also got a Witherbloom Campus. Witherbloom Campus enters the battlefield tapped. Tap it to add a black or a green, or you can pay 4 generic mana, tap it to scry 1. And Azirator's Proving Ground has the swamp, mountain or forest land type, so you can add a black, a red or a green. Comes in tapped, or you can cycle it for 3 mana later on in the game. If you have all the mana you need, you can cycle it to draw a card. And lastly, we have 6 basic forests, 8 basic mountains, and 4 basic swamps. And that's everything. So thank you for listening to this deck tech. If you have any comments for any cards that you would either replace or you would like to see in the deck, always love to hear from you. This is just a deck I put together. I've played it a few times. It's pretty fun. You're not at any point sitting around doing nothing, so and you've got some synergistic pieces in there. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and we want to try and grow as much as possible, so any likes and subscriptions really help with that. We have a Discord, which I'll put in the description below, so if you want any chat about Magic or just want to play some games on Spell Table, we're all there, and we'd love to hear from you. So yeah, my name's Kaizen. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time.